At 9:30, when the last notes of Mrs. Van Rensselaer Pike's harp still trembled beneath the painted ceiling of the Livingston Assembly Rooms, the Dowager Duchess of Ravenstone destroyed Eleanor Hart with a smile. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. In the Hudson Valley, among families who could trace their portraits to patroon manors, Federalist dinners, canal fortunes, and river ice cut by their grandfathers' men, a quiet sentence could travel farther than a shout. "My dear Miss Hart," the Dowager said, touching two gloved fingers to Eleanor's sleeve as if they were intimate friends, "you must not look so pale. Albany is not exile. Many young women of your station would be grateful for a respectable post in a ladies' academy." Across the room, beneath garlands of winter ivy and wax flowers, Lady Clara Ashkam stood beside the piano, with both hands clenched in her muslin skirts. At 12, she was too young to understand every cruelty in the words, and old enough to understand the shape of dismissal. The chill face had gone white, her dark eyes wide and fixed on Eleanor. Eleanor's first instinct was not fear for herself. It was rage for Clara. The Dowager had waited until the room was full. Van Rensselaers, Livingstons, Schuylers, DePasters, old river names, and new railroad money, judges, widows, aldermen, 2 senators' wives, and half the families who determined whether a woman was employable from Albany to New York Harbor. She had waited until Clara had played her small piece, a trembling country air. Eleanor had coaxed from her after weeks of tears and stubborn silence. She had waited until the applause had almost become kindness. Then she had stepped forward, silver-haired and faultlessly dressed in black silk, and taken control of the story. "A ladies' academy?" Eleanor asked. Her voice sounded calm. That comforted her. Calm was a room one built inside oneself when no one else offered shelter. "The Albany Female Institute," said the Dowager. "A very suitable place. I wrote to Mrs. Bellamy myself. She has agreed to accept you at once. No doubt the salary is modest, but then..." Her glance moved with delicate regret over Eleanor's plain gray gown, repaired cuff, and single ribbon at the throat. One must be practical. A murmur passed behind them. Clara made a small sound. Julian Ashkam, Duke of Ravenstone, stood at the far side of the room with his hand on the back of a carved chair. He had not moved since his mother began speaking. In the lamplight, he looked carved from the same dark stone as his house. Tall, controlled, beautifully remote. Men made way for him without noticing they had done it. Women lowered their eyes and then lifted them again. He had that particular power which old American families pretended not to admire and always obeyed. But tonight the power was caught. Eleanor could see it in his face. The calculation, the shock of recognition, the sudden knowledge that the Dowager had chosen not merely to embarrass Eleanor, but to force him before witnesses. If he defended the governess too warmly, he confirmed the insinuation. If he remained silent, he surrendered both Eleanor and Clara. The Dowager understood this. That was why she smiled. "I am afraid," she continued. "We have all been too indulgent. Grief makes a household eccentric. A child without a mother may attach herself unwisely. A governess, finding herself necessary, may mistake necessity for rank. No one blames you, Miss Hart. Ravenstone is a lonely house. My son is a lonely man." That last sentence dropped softly into the room and bloomed poison. Eleanor felt the heat rise in her face, not because it was true in the way the Dowager meant it, but because it held enough truth to wound. Julian was lonely. Clara was starved for affection. Eleanor had become necessary. She had let herself love them both. Love, in a governess, was considered a theft if it reached above the nursery. "Madam," Eleanor said, "if you have arranged a position for me, you might have informed me privately, and risk distressing dear Clara." The dowager's eyes flicked to the child. "No, a clean parting is kinder. Children recover quickly when adults behave with firmness." Clara's mouth opened, but no words came. Eleanor turned slightly, just enough to hold the child in her sight. "Lady Clara is not a parcel to be redirected with the post." The dowager's smile thinned. "You see, this is precisely the difficulty. A servant in a household may care for a child. She may not presume a claim upon one. I have never claimed Lady Clara." "No?" The dowager lifted her brows. "You walked with her in town without a footman last Wednesday. You refused the lace collar I selected for her portrait, because you said she could not breathe in it. You advised my son to decline the Gansevoort dinner because the child had a fever. You corrected the seating of this very musicale, Miss Hart, so that Clara would not be placed beside Mrs. Ten Broek, who frightens her. Each example was true. Each, told here, became an indictment." Eleanor understood then how carefully the trap had been laid. The dowager had not invented a scandal. She had gathered kindnesses and arranged them as crimes. Julian's fingers tightened on the chair. Eleanor looked at him once, only once. She would not beg him to save her. She had been poor too long to confuse rescue with respect. "Your Grace," she said to the dowager, using the title with deliberate courtesy, "if I have overstepped, the fault is mine, but I will not stand in a public room and allow Lady Clara to be taught that affection is shameful, or that gratitude must be punished because it crosses a line drawn by pride." The dowager's eyes hardened. "Take care, Miss Hart. Reputation is a delicate currency. Yours is already overdrawn. And yet," Eleanor said, "I still know the value of silence. Shall we speak of currencies before the county, madam? Shall we calculate the cost of 7 years in which a child was dressed, displayed, and ignored? Shall we count the dollars spent on morning crepe while the nursery fire went out?" Clara gave a sob that broke the room's polish like glass. Eleanor instantly regretted the pain, though not the truth. She took one step toward Clara. The dowager moved at the same time, blocking the path with the perfect instinct of a general taking a bridge. "You will not approach her," she said. It was not loud, but it was command. Clara flinched. That movement decided Eleanor. She could lose Ravenstone. She could lose Julian. She could lose the only steady salary between herself and destitution. But she would not teach Clara that fear was obedience. Eleanor lowered herself into a small curtsy, not to the dowager, not to the room, but to the child. "Lady Clara," she said, "I was engaged to teach you history, reading, French verbs, and enough arithmetic to keep dishonest merchants from cheating you. I hope I have also taught you this. No one, however grand, owns your heart. If I must go to Albany, I go with my head high. You must keep yours higher." Clara's tears spilled over. Julian moved. Every eye turned to him. There was no rustle now, no whisper, no polite cough. The Duke of Ravenstone crossed the polished floor with a measured pace that made the distance seem both endless and too short. Eleanor remembered, absurdly, the first time she had seen him, rain in his hair, mud on his boots, her trunk in his hands, and her own foolish voice ordering him about, as if he were a servant. That was how it had begun. Not in music and scandal, but in rain. 7 weeks earlier, Eleanor Hart arrived at Ravenstone with 1 valise, 1 trunk, and $17 sewn into the lining of her glove. The hired carriage from Albany left. her in the yard because the driver refused to take the horses closer to the house. Ravenstone rose above the Hudson Valley mist with its slate roofs and black stone walls, not so much an estate as a verdict. The river lay below it, pewter, under a November sky. Bare maples lined the drive. A broken fountain stood in the center of the carriage circle, its basin full of rainwater and drowned leaves. A man stood beside the stable arch without a hat. He was tall, dark-coated and soaked through, one gloved hand resting on a gate, as if he had forgotten why he had come outside. He looked like an upper servant who had been sent to receive her and had found the errand beneath comment. Eleanor was cold, tired, and frightened enough to become practical. "I am Miss Eleanor Hart," she called, stepping down before the driver could fail to help her. "The new governess for Lady Clara. Kindly have someone take my trunk inside before the books are ruined." The man looked at her. In later weeks, Eleanor would remember that look and understand the danger in it. At the time, she saw only a strange stillness. He seemed unused to being addressed directly. His hair, black and wet, clung to his brow. His face was lean, pale, and handsome in a severe way that did not invite conversation. His eyes were gray, almost colorless under the storm. "My books," she added, because fear made her sharper than courtesy. "Your books," he repeated. His voice was low and rough, like a door opened after years of disuse. "My livelihood," Eleanor said, "and Lady Clara's, if I am to be of any use." Something changed in his expression. It was not a smile. It was the memory of one. He lifted the trunk himself. "Oh," Eleanor said, startled by the ease with which he took the weight. "Thank you. If you direct me to the housekeeper, I will not trouble you further." "There is no housekeeper. No housekeeper. Not since August. And no one thought to mention this to the governess expected today. No one thought of many things. That is inconvenient. It has been Ravenstone's specialty for some years." Dryness flickered beneath the words. Eleanor, who had lived on salaries paid late by men who considered education ornamental, recognized a fellow sufferer of household mismanagement, and felt less alone. "Then we shall begin by being inconvenient in return," she said. He carried her trunk through the carved oak doors. Inside, Ravenstone smelled of cold ash and damp wool. Portraits of Ashkam judges, canal commissioners, militia colonels and railroad directors watched her, with the suspicion of people who had never carried luggage. The man set down her trunk. Before either could speak, a child's voice came from the staircase. "Is she the new one?" Lady Clara Ashkam stood halfway up, small and rigid, with black hair falling from a ribbon and a wooden horse tucked beneath one arm. One leg of the horse was missing. Her dress was expensive, white, and entirely wrong for a rainy day. She stared at Eleanor as if measuring how quickly she would leave. Eleanor had seen that expression in children before. Not dislike, self-defense. "I am Miss Hart," she said, "and you must be Lady Clara. I mustn't be anything." The man beside Eleanor went very still. Eleanor ignored him, a promising beginning. Most people spend years learning that. Clara blinked. "Are you insolent?" "When necessary. To children, especially to children who ask excellent questions." The wooden horse lowered a fraction. The man made a sound behind Eleanor. It might have been a cough. It might have been surprise. Clara looked past Eleanor at him. The small hardness returned. "You can go." The words struck him. Eleanor felt it, though she did not understand it. He inclined his head, not like a servant, not like a father, but like a man accepting a sentence, and turned away. Only later would Eleanor learn that Clara had spoken to her father exactly 3 times that month, and always to dismiss him. A maid named Ruth led Eleanor to a narrow room under the east gable. The fire had not been laid. The washbasin was cracked, but the room was dry. "It isn't what was promised," Ruth whispered, "but it's dry. Dry is a luxury today." Eleanor set her valise down. "Who was the man in the yard?" Ruth froze. "The dark one," Eleanor clarified. "He carried my trunk." The maid's eyes widened with horror, then with calculation, then with the loyal terror servants developed in houses full of secrets. "That would be Mr. Ash." "Mr. Ash?" "Yes, miss." "What is his position?" Ruth's mouth opened, closed. "He attends to things." "That is not a position. That is a symptom." Ruth almost smiled, then remembered herself. "You had best ask him, miss." "I shall." But Mr. Ash did not appear at dinner, because there was no dinner in any civilized sense. A tray came to Eleanor's room. Cold ham, bread, an apple with a bruise, and tea that had died nobly some hours before. With it came a note in a hard, elegant hand. "Lessons begin tomorrow at 9. The child is difficult. You may leave within the week if you prefer. Your wages for the week will be paid regardless." No signature. Eleanor read it twice and grew angry, not because the child was difficult. Children were allowed difficulty, but because some adult had decided difficulty was the child's nature rather than the house's failure. She turned the paper over and wrote beneath the message, "I was not engaged for a week. I was engaged for a child, Miss Hart." Then she asked Ruth to deliver it to whoever had sent the first note. The next morning, Clara refused history, arithmetic, French, breakfast, and the existence of Ohio. "Ohio is not optional," Eleanor said. "It is far away, so is Rome, yet it caused a great deal of trouble. I hate maps. Then we will begin with roads." Eleanor took the atlas and opened it to New York State. "Here is Albany. Here is the Hudson. Here is the road I traveled yesterday while freezing my ankles off and wondering whether Ravenstone employed cannibals." Clara stared. "It does not. I am relieved. Grandmama says governesses should not joke. Grandmama is welcome to her hobbies." Clara looked toward the door as if expecting thunder. None came. For 20 minutes they discussed roads. Wagon roads, post roads, river landings, turnpikes where tollmen overcharged travelers who looked tired. Clara knew more than she admitted. She corrected Eleanor twice, and glowed when Eleanor thanked her for it. At 10, the Dowager Duchess entered without knocking. She was small, erect, and silver-haired, with black silk skirts that whispered like legal documents. Her eyes took in the atlas, the chalk dust on Clara's fingers, the absence of the lace collar laid out for the child, and Eleanor's plain gown. "Miss Hart, Your Grace." Eleanor rose. "Lady Clara studies French at this hour." Lady Clara refused French at this hour. The dowager's face did not change. A governess does not report refusal. She corrects it. A physician does not cure fever by scolding the thermometer. Clara sucked in a breath. The dowager moved her gaze to the child. "Leave us." Clara obeyed at once, all brightness extinguished. When the door closed, the dowager said, "You are bold. I am employed by my son. Then I will answer to him regarding my employment. My son answers to grief, habit, and avoidance. In practical matters, the household looks to me." Eleanor heard the warning under the civility. She also heard the grief. It would have been easier if the dowager were merely cruel. She was not. She was a woman who had mistaken control for survival, until she could no longer tell one from the other. "I do not wish to contest your authority," Eleanor said. "But if Lady Clara is to learn, She must first stop defending herself from every room she enters. Lady Clara requires discipline. Lady Clara requires trust. Trust is earned. So is obedience. The Dowager regarded her for a long moment. You will find Ravenstone less romantic than poor young women imagine. I assure you, poverty leaves little time for romance. Julian Ashkam should have corrected her that day. He should have said, I am not Mr. Ash. I am the master of this house, the father of the child you teach, the man whose name signs your wages. He should have ended the misunderstanding before it became deception. He did not. The reason was not whim. It was not sport. Julian had not played a game in 7 years. That evening he stood outside Clara's door and heard his daughter laugh. It was brief, startled, almost angry with itself, but it was laughter. Eleanor had apparently explained multiplication by inventing a family of dishonest Albany bakers who sold rolls in uneven dozens. Clara objected to their arithmetic and then to their morals. Eleanor declared moral outrage an excellent path to sums. Julian stood in the passage with his hand against the wall and felt the sound enter him like thaw. Then Clara said, Do you think Mr. Ash is sad because he is poor? Eleanor answered, Sadness is not reserved for any income. But he looks poor. He looks wet. There is a distinction. Clara laughed again. Julian closed his eyes. If he entered as her father, the laughter would die. If he entered as the Duke, Miss Hart would stiffen into courtesy and distance. But as Mr. Ash, as the man Eleanor had mistaken for someone useful but unimportant, he could stand near the life returning to his house without frightening it away. He told himself it would be for a day. By the third day, the deception had acquired servants. Ruth would not meet his eyes. Old Martin in the stables muttered that no good came of masquerades. Julian's steward, Mr. Bell, stared at him as if he had taken leave of his senses. She will discover it, Bell said in the estate office, where maps of tenant farms and river leases lay under brass weights. Yes, and then? Then she will despise me. Your Grace, that is not a plan. It is a forecast. Bell had served the Ashkams since before Julian's marriage. He was one of the few men alive who dared look irritated at him. The canal rents need your signature. The Kinderhook timber contract is disputed. Your mother has written to the Van Rensselaers about December invitations. You cannot skulk about as a footman because your daughter laughed. I am not skulking. You carried coal to the schoolroom. The schoolroom was cold. We employ men for that. Then we employ inattentive men. Bell sighed. This is dangerous. Julian knew it. That was the torment. Each hour made the truth heavier. Yet each hour brought Clara closer to speech, and Eleanor closer to the unguarded honesty he had not known he needed. As Duke, he was obeyed, feared, managed, petitioned, and avoided. As Mr. Ash, Eleanor told him the nursery curtains were gloomy enough to discourage agriculture, asked him to fetch chalk, scolded him for dripping rainwater on schoolbooks, and once handed him a broken doll with the instruction, if men can survey rail lines, surely one can mend an arm. He mended it badly. Clara noticed and improved it. The Dowager began her campaign the next morning. Clara began to watch her not with need, but with study. How do you do that? She asked after Mrs. Tenbroke left in a storm of offended feathers. Do what? Say things that sound polite until it is too late. Practice. Will you teach me? When you are old enough not to waste it on servants and animals. Clara considered. Grandmama uses it on everyone. Yes, Eleanor said. That is why she is lonely. The words escaped before she could soften them. Clara did not look shocked. She looked thoughtful. That afternoon, Julian found his daughter in the stable yard. Not running from him, not embracing him, simply standing near the horse trough, while Eleanor showed her how to offer apple slices to a nervous mare. Clara glanced at him. "Mr. Ash mended my doll badly." Julian stopped. Eleanor's eyes danced. "He has other virtues, I am told." "Name one," Clara demanded. "He carries trunks." "That is not a virtue. That is arms." Julian felt a laugh rise in him and did not know what to do with it. It came out rough, almost broken. Clara stared at him. For a moment, terror moved through him. Had he frightened her? But then she smiled, quick as a match. It was the first smile she had given him in a year. He paid for it the next day. The reveal came not through confession but accident. Eleanor entered the estate office with Clara's copybook, looking for Mr. Bell, and found Julian at the desk signing leases. Not helping, not carrying, not standing aside, signing. Bell stood beside him with a stack of papers and said, "Your Grace, the Albany timber men will not wait past Friday." The words struck the room. Eleanor stopped. Julian rose. Bell closed his eyes as if praying for a small administrative death. "Your Grace," Eleanor repeated. No anger yet. That was worse. Her face became very still, all warmth withdrawing behind discipline. "Miss Hart," Julian said. "Not Mr. Ash. No, not a servant. No, the Duke of Ravenstone. Yes." Bell murmured something about the ledgers and fled. Eleanor remained where she was, copybook in hand. "How long?" "From the beginning." Her fingers tightened on the book. "When I ordered you to carry my trunk." "Yes." "When I asked whether the Duke meant to dismiss me." "Yes." "When I spoke of his daughter as if he were elsewhere." Julian could not defend himself. "Yes." Color rose in her face now. Not embarrassment alone, but humiliation sharpened by betrayal. "You allowed me to be ignorant in your house." "I did." "Why?" He could have said because Clara laughed. "Because you looked at me without fear. Because for 7 years, every conversation I entered became a petition or accusation, and you handed me a broken doll." "All true, none sufficient." "Because I was selfish," he said. That answer stopped her more than an excuse would have. He came around the desk but did not approach too closely. "I told myself it was for Clara, that if you treated me as an ordinary man, I could hear what the house had hidden from me, that if Clara spoke of me without knowing I listened, I might learn how to reach her." Some of that was true, but not enough to cleanse the lie. I kept it because I wanted, for a few hours at a time, not to be the sum of my failures. Eleanor's eyes shone. She would not let tears fall, and I was useful to that. "You were never merely useful." That is a gentleman's answer to a poor woman's injury. The sentence hit harder because it was precise. Julian bowed his head. "Yes." She set the copybook on the desk. "Lady Clara has completed her composition. She chose the Erie Canal because she says canals prove water may be persuaded but not commanded." Despite everything, his mouth moved. "That sounds like her teacher." "No, it sounds like her." She turned to go. "Miss Hart." She stopped but did not face him. "I will not dismiss you." At that she looked back. Her eyes were bright and fierce. "You mistake the injury again. The question is not whether you will dismiss me. It is whether I can remain where my dignity depends upon your mercy." Then she left him with his title. That evening, the Dowager came to Eleanor's room. "I have written to Mrs. Bellamy," she said. "The post in Albany is real. $40 a month, lodging included. More than generous for a woman in your situation." Eleanor stood beside the small desk. Her trunk lay open, not packed but ready. "You were confident I would need it." I was confident you would understand prudence once emotion cooled. Prudence for whom? For all of us. My son is grateful to you. Gratitude in a lonely man can wear dangerous clothing. You are intelligent enough to know this. Eleanor looked at the dowager's face and saw, for the first time, fear beneath the strategy. Not fear of Eleanor's poverty or ambition. Fear of disorder. Fear that Julian might choose something she could not manage. Fear that Clara might love someone who did not ask the dowager's permission. You think I mean to climb, Eleanor said. I think hunger climbs whether or not it calls itself virtue. My hunger has taught me many things, Your Grace. Stealing a child's affection for profit was not one of them. The dowager's gaze sharpened. Take the Albany Post. Leave with a letter of recommendation. Refuse, and I cannot protect your reputation from the obvious interpretation. There is no obvious interpretation. There is always an obvious interpretation. When a young governess spends private hours in a widower's household after mistaking him for a servant, people enjoy obvious interpretations. They require so little imagination. Eleanor felt the noose then. If she stayed, she could be painted as scheming. If she left under pressure, she confirmed inferiority. If she protested, she sounded guilty. The dowager had built a trap out of social common sense, the strongest material in the county. When must I answer? Eleanor asked. Tomorrow night, the Pikes musicale. Mrs. Bellamy will be present. I will announce the happy arrangement informally among friends. Informally, Eleanor said, with kindness. No, with witnesses. The dowager inclined her head as if acknowledging a competent opponent. You might have done well in another life, Miss Hart. I intend to do well in this one. After she left, Eleanor sat on the edge of the bed until the candle burned low. She loved Clara. That truth had become plain in the moment she understood she might lose her. She loved Julian too, though she was angrier at that truth because it had entered under a false name. But love could not be the whole of a woman's judgment. She had seen too many women give their labor, tenderness and silence to households that rewarded them with dependence and called it protection. If she remained at Ravenstone, it would not be as a secret, a convenience, or a scandal waiting to be named by someone else. She took out paper and wrote 3 letters. One to Mrs. Bellamy in Albany, accepting an interview but not the position. One to Julian, resigning effective after the musicale, unless her role in Clara's life could be defined openly and honorably. One to Clara, sealed but not delivered, explaining that leaving was sometimes a way to refuse being made small. Then she slept poorly and woke resolved. The musicale was held in Poughkeepsie, in rooms above a bank whose directors' wives believed culture improved interest rates. Sleighs and carriages crowded the street. Lamps burned against the winter dark. Inside, the county glittered in silk, wool, pearls, watch chains, polished boots, and inherited grudges. Clara clung to Eleanor's hand until they reached the cloakroom. I cannot play, she whispered. You can choose not to, Eleanor said. Grandmama says I must. Then choose whether you obey because you are afraid or because you wish to prove something to yourself. Clara swallowed. What if my hands shake? Then they shake and make music anyway. Julian arrived separately with his mother, black-coated, immaculate, unreadable. Eleanor felt his gaze find her across the room and refused to look until she could do so without pleading. When she did, he inclined his head, not as duke to governess, not as master to servant, but as one guilty soul to the person he had wronged. It did not repair anything, but it did not pretend to. Clara played after the Schuyler twins sang a duet about spring, with more enthusiasm than pitch. The child's first notes trembled. Then Eleanor saw her shoulders settle. She played the little country air, through once missed, a note, recovered, and finished. Applause rose, not thunderous but real. Clara turned, searching first for Eleanor. That was the instant the Dowager moved. She crossed the space with perfect timing, embraced Clara lightly for the room to see, then turned to Eleanor with a smile sharp enough to cut ribbon. "My dear Miss Hart, you must not look so pale. Albany is not exile, and the trap closed." Now, with the entire county watching, Julian crossed the room. Eleanor had just told Clara that no one owned her heart. The Dowager stood between them. Clara's face was wet. Mrs. Bellamy of Albany, a severe woman in brown satin, observed with the troubled expression of someone discovering she had been invited to employ a scandal rather than a teacher. Julian stopped beside Eleanor, not in front of her. That mattered. The Dowager saw it and understood the danger. "Julian," she said softly, mother to son, warning to Duke, "this is not the place." "No," he said, "it is exactly the place you chose." A sound moved through the room. His voice was not loud, but it carried with the habit of command. "Since my household has been made public entertainment, I will supply the missing facts." Eleanor turned to him quickly. "Your Grace." He looked at her. "I will not speak for you." Then he faced the room. "Miss Hart arrived at Ravenstone 7 weeks ago to teach my daughter. On that day, through my fault and cowardice, she mistook me for a servant. I permitted the mistake to continue." The room erupted in whispers. The Dowager went still as marble. Julian continued, "Not because Miss Hart sought advantage. She did not. Not because she lacked discernment. She was deceived by the one person in the house with the power to correct her. I did it because my daughter would not speak to me, because my house had become a museum of grief, and because Miss Hart, believing me of no importance, told me the truth." Eleanor's throat tightened. He did not romanticize it. He did not make himself noble. That was the first mercy. "I injured her dignity," he said. "I risked her reputation. I allowed my mother's concern for family standing to find a weapon I had placed within reach." "Julian," the Dowager said, and now there was fear in it. He looked at her with terrible gentleness. "Mother, you have protected the Ashkam name for 7 years by sacrificing everything too tender to survive inspection. No more." Clara stepped from behind the Dowager. It was a small movement. In that room, it was a rebellion. "Miss Hart did not make me love her," Clara said. Her voice shook. Everyone heard. "She made rules. I hated them. Then I liked them because they stayed where she put them. She did not say Mama was watching from heaven, like Mrs. Ten Broke does. She said dead people cannot do our living for us. I hated that too. Then I thought it was true." Tears ran down her face unchecked. Eleanor's hands closed at her sides to keep from reaching too soon. Clara looked at Julian. "And she told me I did not have to forgive Papa before I was ready." Julian flinched, but he did not look away. "Are you ready?" asked Mrs. Pike before she could stop herself. Clara considered this with the seriousness of a judge. "No, but I am nearer." A sound like a broken laugh moved through the room, then died because everyone was close to tears and unwilling to admit it. The Dowager tried once more. "A child's attachment is not evidence of propriety." "No," Eleanor said. All eyes came back to her. She had been defended. Now she had to stand. "No," she repeated. "It is not. Nor is a title evidence of wisdom, nor grief evidence of love, nor caution evidence of kindness." I am a governess. I have been paid to enter rooms where I am needed and leave before anyone admits I mattered. I know the terms of my profession. She turned slightly toward Mrs. Bellamy. Madam, I am grateful for your willingness to consider me for Albany. I will call on you tomorrow if you still wish it, but I will not accept a position arranged to hide me. Mrs. Bellamy's mouth firmed. I would prefer to interview a teacher, not receive a package. Call at 10. The Dowager's nostrils flared. Eleanor faced Julian last. The room leaned toward them shamelessly. As for Ravenstone, she said, I cannot remain where my place is defined by pity, secrecy, or affection no one dares name. If I am to continue in Lady Clara's life, it must be openly, with respect, and with the understanding that I am free to refuse any arrangement that diminishes me. Julian bowed. Not the shallow courtesy of rank, but a full acknowledgement before the county. Those are the only terms I would dare offer you now. And what terms do you offer? His face changed, not softened, clarified. The powerful man returned, not as armor, but as responsibility. First, a written apology, signed by me, stating the facts of my deception and your innocence, to be placed with any family who questions your reputation. Second, a settlement of wages for the full year, whether you remain or not, because I made your position impossible. Third, if you choose to return to Ravenstone as Clara Governess, your authority in the schoolroom will be recognized by me publicly and by the household formally. He paused. The room held its breath. Fourth, he said, quieter but still clear, if, after time and freedom enough to judge me, you choose to know me not as employer but as man, I will count that the greatest honor of my life. If you do not, I will still honor the first 3 terms. That saved him, not the declaration. The if you do not. Eleanor felt something inside her loosen, painfully, like a knot untied after being pulled too hard. The Dowager looked around and saw the room shifting. Not all at once. Society rarely repented in public. It merely adjusted its posture and later claimed it had always stood so. Mrs. Van Rensselaer Pike dabbed her eyes. Judge Livingston studied Julian with new respect. Mrs. Ten Brook looked disappointed that virtue had become fashionable before scandal could fully ripen. The Dowager had miscalculated. She had assumed the county would punish a governess for overstepping. Instead, they were watching a duke, abase himself with such controlled dignity that condemning Eleanor would require condemning him. Power changed hands without a gavel. Clara crossed the floor. No one stopped her. She stood before Eleanor, trembling. If you go to Albany, may I still write? Yes. If you come back, will you still make me do fractions? Yes. Clara's face crumpled. Then I do not know what I want. Eleanor knelt, heedless of the watching room. That is honest. We can begin there. Clara put her arms around her neck. Eleanor held her, not as a claim, as an answer. The next morning, Eleanor went to Albany and kept the interview. Mrs. Bellamy received her in a neat office, smelling of ink, coal smoke, and girls' boots drying by a stove. She offered $42 a month, lodging, Sundays free after chapel, and no aristocratic theatricals unless one counted trustees. Eleanor thanked her and asked for a week. Mrs. Bellamy, who disliked being used by duchesses, granted it. On the road back along the Winter River, Eleanor understood that leaving and staying could both be courage, depending on whether she chose or merely obeyed. At Ravenstone, Clara waited in the hall. She did not run. She had too much dignity for running where footmen could see. But her whole body leaned forward. I have 1 week, Eleanor said. Clara nodded solemnly. I have begun fractions without you. That is suspicious. I did them badly so you would not feel unnecessary. How considerate. Julian stood at the foot of the stairs. He looked as if he had not slept. Good, Eleanor thought, and then felt unkind, and then decided a little unkindness was medicinal. Miss Hart, he said. Your Grace. Clara looked between them. Are we being formal because of feelings? Yes, Eleanor and Julian said together. Clara sighed. Adults are inefficient. The week that followed did not heal everything. Julian wrote the apology. Eleanor corrected 2 evasive phrases and made him write them again. He announced her schoolroom authority before the household. The Dowager began asking Clara to tea instead of commanding her. Julian did not court Eleanor with flowers or jewels. He arrived when invited, left when dismissed, answered directly, and learned that continued honesty cost more than one public confession. On the 7th day, Eleanor walked alone to the ridge above the river. Snow lay in thin patches under the trees. The Hudson moved below, dark and patient. Julian found her there, but stopped several yards away. Clara said you would be here, he said. Clara has become alarmingly observant. She had a good teacher. Eleanor let that pass. Mrs. Bellamy needs my answer by noon tomorrow. I know. You will not ask me to stay? His hands flexed at his sides. I want to. That is not an answer. No, I will not ask as your employer. I will not ask as Clara's father, though God knows she wants it. I will ask only as myself, and only if you wish to hear it. Eleanor watched the river. Ask. He drew a breath. Stay because you choose to. Stay because Ravenstone can become something other than what it was. Stay because Clara loves you and I. He stopped. Not from uncertainty, but from care. Because I love you, not as rescue, not as gratitude, not as the woman who warmed my house. I love your courage when it is inconvenient. Your mercy when anger would be easier. Your refusal to let sorrow become law. I love that you saw me first when I was least titled and most ashamed. If you leave, I will honor it. If you stay, I will spend my life making sure you never regret the courage it took. Eleanor closed her eyes. There it was. Not a trap, not a bargain, not a public rescue, but an offer laid where she could walk away from it. I love you, she said, and heard him go still. I am furious about it in several particulars. A sound escaped him, half laugh, half breath. She turned. If I stay, I will not be your secret. No, I will not become Clara's mother by vacancy. She had a mother. She has grief. I can love her without replacing anyone. Yes, I will continue to teach until we decide otherwise. I will keep my wages until marriage is not a word used to settle accounts. His eyes warmed with something like awe. Agreed, and your mother will not command my clothes, my letters, my pupils, or my conscience. She will attempt at least 2 of those by breakfast. Then you will enjoy correcting her. I may come to. Eleanor looked back at the river. The future did not open like a ballroom door. It stood like a road in winter, rutted, uncertain, passable with care. She thought of Albany, of Mrs. Bellamy's clean office and honest salary. She thought of Clara pretending to fail fractions. She thought of Julian in the rain, carrying her trunk because she had ordered him to, and of Julian in a public room taking blame that was truly his. I will decline Albany, she said. Julian did not touch her at once. He waited, asking without words. She offered her hand. He took it as if entrusted with a treaty. In spring, Ravenstone changed by inches. The nursery curtains came down. Clara chose green ones. The Dowager and Clara took tea by weekly invitation, not command. Eleanor remained Miss Hart for some months, scandalizing Mrs. Ten Broke and satisfying Mrs. Bellamy, who wrote that any woman capable of making a duke wait possessed sound judgment. When Eleanor and Julian married in September on the south lawn above the Hudson, Clara stood beside her in a blue dress she could breathe in. After the vows, she asked if she must say Duchess now. "Only if you are trying to get out of fractions," Eleanor said, and Julian laughed in the open air. Years later, people would tell the story badly. They would say the governess mistook the duke for a servant and won his heart through innocence. They would say he rescued her from scandal. They would say Clara was healed by love, as if love were a tonic one swallowed and woke cured. Eleanor never corrected every version. Society required its little stupidities. But in the family, the truth remained. She had mistaken Julian because he had been hiding from his own life. He had loved her because she refused to flatter the hiding place. Clara had healed because she was allowed anger, memory, laughter, and time. And the Dowager, who had once tried to send Eleanor to Albany, eventually admitted, only once, and under cover of criticizing the tea, that Ravenstone had been improved by inconvenience. Eleanor treasured that sentence more than diamonds. On rainy evenings, when the Hudson Valley mist climbed the lawns and Ravenstone's windows glowed gold instead of blind gray, Julian would sometimes find Eleanor in the hall beneath the old portraits. "Miss Hart," he would say, in the voice of a man standing hatless in the rain. "Mr. Ash," she would reply, with the severity of a governess whose books were getting wet, "kindly take my trunk inside." And because love had taught him the dignity of obedience freely given, the Duke of Ravenstone always did.